Hello everyone and welcome back to our month-long series on aircraft emergencies. So today is day 27, Mayday 27, and we are talking about controlled flight into terrain. So CFIT, or controlled flight into terrain, happens when a pilot inadvertently flies a completely airworthy aircraft into either terrain, water, some obstacle while under full control. So the unfortunate thing about this type of accident is that the aircraft is working completely fine, but due to the pilot's loss of situational awareness or some distraction or by taking some unnecessary risk, the flight ends up in a CFIT situation. So here's a typical scenario where this can happen. So let's say you're flying along on a cross-country flight and the ceilings are already worse than expected. In an attempt to keep or to regain visual contact with the ground, you keep descending to a lower altitude. And then while doing this, you don't see telephone wires, a hill, some trees, or some obstacle, and then you strike it. Or here's another scenario. Let's say you are flying into some grass strip in the middle of nowhere. It's short, so you are coming in low and slow, so you can touch down right at the beginning of the runway. You don't see the power lines running across the road just before the runway, and then you hit them. Now, after describing the scenario of how you get into this emergency, next we usually talk about how to get yourself out of the problem and what you can do to land safely. But unfortunately for this one, the flight usually ends where the terrain is impacted, or the power lines are impacted, or the tower, and there isn't any further flying to really discuss, unfortunately. So because of that, it's very important to discuss how we can prevent ourselves from getting into this situation to begin with. So there are a few different things that we can be aware of. So about 25% of CFIT accidents happen in the takeoff or initial climb segment of the flight. So many times when terrain is impacted on climb out, it's because of density altitude and improper or lack of takeoff performance calculations. So you depart an airport, which is higher elevation, warmer temperatures, maybe you have a full load, and once you get the aircraft into the air, it just won't climb, and you hit some trees off the departure end of the runway because of the unplanned density altitude that wasn't accounted for. So you want to make sure that you perform proper pre-flight planning, understand density altitude and your climb performance. Now, this isn't entirely confined to the western part of the US as you might initially think. Even on the East Coast, in some of these little airports in the hills or mountains, if you want to call them mountains, in the summertime, it's hot and humid. If you are heavy, you aren't going to get very good climb performance out of them. So the next thing to be mindful of is in cruise. So the typical CFIT scenario in cruise is getting boxed into a mountain canyon, or you're scud running like in the first scenario. So if you're trying to maintain visual contact with the ground and low ceilings, you are really putting yourself at risk for hitting some tower, power lines, or hill. Or the other side of the coin, take a nice VFR day. Sometimes you might be out flying real low over sparsely populated terrain. When at low altitudes, there is a risk for CFIT. This year there's already been a number of aircraft that have hit power lines. Some of these have been ag aircraft, but not all of them. And then the greatest number of CFIT accidents happen in the descent and the landing phase. So again, this could be in low visibility, or at an unfamiliar airport, or at night, or even worse, a combination of any of those. So at night, in unfamiliar airport, you could have the black hole effect if there aren't any other references to gauge your altitude. So you end up coming in lower, and then you strike some trees on final. So for unfamiliar airports, you can always reference the chart supplement, right? So this will let you know if there's rising terrain off any quadrant of the airport, or if there are tall trees or obstacles that you need to be aware of when you're flying into that airport. So a quick recap to avoid CFIT. Do proper pre-flight planning, review airport information, know where rising terrain and obstacles are before you get there, review density altitude, understand your takeoff and climb out performance, stay attentive, and avoid distractions, especially when down low, right? Towers, power lines, these are all hazards for low altitude flying, and then also manage your risks. Scud running is rarely a good idea. Flying 200 feet over the beach or desolate area may seem like fun, but potentially these are places where there'll be obstacles in your path it might be tough to see them and avoid them until it is too late. So thanks everyone for joining us on day 27. Don't create emergency in a completely well-running aircraft. Hope we catch you tomorrow on day 28. Fly safe and talk to you soon.